There has always been a slop problem in corporate communications and marketing. Everybody's just regurgitating conventional wisdom.
You're saying that predates generative AI?
Oh, absolutely. I would call it the original sin of marketing.
Our 52nd episode of Everything Thought Leadership will feature my discussion with Richard McGill Murphy, the person who put thought leadership on the map at ServiceNow, which has been one of the most successful business software companies of the last decade. In our interview, he will talk about the biggest lessons he learned from working in thought leadership at ServiceNow and before that at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, how AI is reshaping the thought leadership profession, and his plans for reshaping tech companies' approach to thought leadership at his new firm. Richard, great to have you on our podcast. Since 2015, you've been head of editorial and thought leadership at two large B2B tech companies, first HP Enterprise and, of course, more recently, ServiceNow. And from my experience with tech companies and the people who have worked in them, including SAP, going back to 1998, my experience is that tech companies often view thought leadership as a kind of a foreign entity in the organization, the thought leadership function. A different breed of people than the product marketers, brand marketers, whose jobs these tech companies understand well. So first question, do you agree with that? And if so, looking back on your 11 years at HPE and ServiceNow, what were the three biggest challenges of getting leaders, both those companies, particularly ServiceNow, to embrace thought leadership in the way that you wanted them to embrace it?
First of all, Bob, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm a fan. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Great question about what I learned from doing thought leadership at HPE and ServiceNow. I've been at this long enough so that I've seen a lot of changes in how tech companies approach thought leadership. When I joined HPE back in 2015, I was hired as editor-in-chief on the global brand team. And back then, I think I may have been the first editor-in-chief role at a major tech company, certainly one of the first. The entity that I joined was in total flux, which gave me a lot of interesting opportunities. I joined the global brand team. HPE had just spun out from HP. It was, essentially the data center hardware and software half of Hewlett-Packard. So suddenly you had this new company with $50 billion in revenue and no brand, except for its legacy association with HP. So we had to build everything. It needed a website, it needed a logo, it needed a voice and a tone and, a story to tell the world. And that's the field that I played in. That experience taught me a bunch of lessons. One big one is that thought leadership is a bit of a foreign entity. We can quibble with just how foreign it is. IBM is a tech company, and IBM, for my money, pioneered modern tech thought leadership back in the Great Depression when they launched Think magazine. So there is a past to this kind of work, to tech companies wanting to establish themselves as expert authorities on not just the products that they sell, but the business challenges that their products help address and how generally those business challenges affect broader business and society. That goes back a while. What you find in big tech companies, and I definitely found this at HPE and at ServiceNow, which is a very different beast, right? HPE was a giant legacy company that was rebranding. ServiceNow was a extremely fast-growing mid-sized tech company with rapidly accelerating revenue, lots of customers, no brand at all. And that's not unusual in Silicon Valley. So ServiceNow had grown mainly on the back of engineering, sales, and product marketing. When I got there, I'll switch to ServiceNow. When I got there, they were at a really interesting pivot point where what they had done to get to about $1.9 billion in revenue in 2017 was not going to get them to the next level. They were basically, ServiceNow had always had the vision of itself that it was going to be the workflow platform for the modern enterprise. Any workflow, any function, any company, any industry, anywhere. That was the founder's original vision, Fred Luddy. But like a lot of SaaS companies, ServiceNow found as it got off the ground 20 years ago that customers weren't particularly interested in buying an everything platform. They were only interested in buying applications that ran on that platform. So the application that took ServiceNow from $0 to $1 billion was this very specific, basically a ticketing system for IT help desks. Term of art being IT service management. That took ServiceNow from 0 to $1 billion. When I joined, ServiceNow was starting to make strides towards realizing the founder's original vision. They were building solutions not just for IT help desk, but for customer service, process management, HR service management, procurement, finance, all of the functions across the enterprise. But in the market, they were still known as a ticketing system for help desks. That framing really constricted their growth potential because generally analysts and a lot of customers and the press were putting them in a smaller box than they deserve to be. And then there was really interesting business math behind what was happening also, Bob. As ServiceNow grew, and when I joined, annual growth was north of 30%. 8 years later, it's still around 20 off the $13 billion base. That growth is coming from a relatively limited number of the world's biggest organizations. So in order to keep growing at those rates, you can't just sell into IT, you have to sell to all the other functions. As you start selling across all the other functions, your customers get more senior. As your customers get more senior, they generally become less interested in the ins and outs, the speeds and the feeds, to use the cliche, of your tech, and more interested in the business value, the strategic impact of your tech. So you're going from like a customer who's typically an IT director, senior director, up into the C-suite, often with board participation. So it's at that point, as you're expanding your frame across the enterprise, and now I'm speaking generically inspired by ServiceNow, that's when thought leadership becomes super important, because you have to be able to frame your go-to-market in terms of business value and strategic impact, and not just in terms of the merits of your particular tech solution.
Yeah. So was it somebody at the top of ServiceNow and the leadership team that came to you in 2015 and said, in so many words, we need a thought leadership group? Richard, can you start and run one?
Yeah, pretty much. It was 2017. The then CEO, John Donahoe, who would run Bain Consulting and then eBay before ServiceNow, had reached the conclusion, not we need Richard to do thought leadership, but more we need a brand. And that brand needs to be supported by thought leadership. And that's how I came to ServiceNow. And one of the biggest challenges joining giant companies like HPE and even mid-sized companies like ServiceNow is that there's not really a recognized box to fit you into for ServiceNow. So I joined HPE as an individual contributor with a fancy title, no team, no budget, on the brand team. And then it was exactly the same story at ServiceNow, but on the comms team. ServiceNow grew a lot faster than HPE, so there was a lot more organizational change. So I started on the comms team, and then I went to marketing, and I persuaded the company to stand up a centralized content center of excellence to house thought leadership, as well as the corporate blog and all of the distribution channels for content. That lasted like a hot 11 months. And then we were all moved into the global brand team. There was a lot of change. And what that speaks to is, one, growth companies are constantly morphing. And then two, thought leadership, although it's more established and recognized than it was when I started doing this work, it still doesn't fit easily into your typical marketing and communication structure at a company. We can talk if you want about like ideal org structures for thought leadership, but suffice to say for now that it typically doesn't exist inside most companies.
Yeah, I mean, in a tech company, it doesn't nicely exist, I think, under brand marketing or product marketing. Like it's complementary, but not exactly what those two functions are doing. So in my experience, it's been an uneasy fit in many companies, tech and others, with the folks in charge of brand marketing and the folks in charge of product or service marketing in a consulting firm.
Yeah. And it's an easier sell, obviously, at a consulting firm like McKinsey, where essentially what they're selling is human expertise. Every single McKinsey partner has an interest in being seen as a thought leader in his or her particular business. That's less the case in tech companies, which is where you get the attitude, not uncommon, thought leadership is a nice to have. What we really need is lead generation. What I found is really important in order to make thought leadership work inside a company. You have to be able to convince marketing and comms leadership that what you're doing is actually complementary to their core responsibility of creating leads for sales. Your thought leadership provides air cover for that whole motion. There's a lot of work that goes into not just doing work that's useful and interesting in the abstract and relates to the area that the company is in. And in HPE's case, advanced computing, the future of the data center. ServiceNow's case, how AI is changing the enterprise. That was the core topic of everything, the core of everything that I did there. It can't be off on an island, though. That research has to have its own integrity and has to be answering questions that your audience of business leaders, potential customers, analysts, and press have about the challenge, but it also has to be orchestrated with the rest of your go-to-market. Any big research study that we did, like the Enterprise AI Maturity Index or the Workforce Skills Forecast, when you publish it and talk about it on social media, there have to be links down into your blog and your solution descriptions, and you have to do your sales enablement so that your salespeople are armed with relevant proprietary insights, tidily packaged up in emails that they can send to their customers. All of that is how you prove the value of thought leadership.
One of the things I saw you quoted on 2 years ago was a Content Marketing Institute article about what you had done at ServiceNow at that time, or up to that time. And you said everybody was willing to give me a chance, but I wouldn't say that my job security was super awesome in the first couple of years. What do you think led the leaders of ServiceNow, your boss and maybe that person's boss, to give you what was apparently was a long rope?
Yeah, I wouldn't say anybody's job security is ever super awesome at a growth company just because they change so fast. You have to be nimble to stick around. What sort of proved the value of what I did to marketing leadership was, one, they could see that it was contributing to awareness and to lead generation, and we could measure that. For example, a stat that I was proud of at both HPE and ServiceNow was that we found that visitors to our thought leadership site, it was called Enterprise.next at HPE, it was called Workflow at ServiceNow. People who consumed that content were something like 5 to 8 times more likely to visit ServiceNow, to visit the corporate website and give up an email address to download a white paper and become a sales lead. So things like that got the attention of product marketing. More broadly, the big awareness-focused research projects that I did became the core of big company-wide integrated marketing efforts. I'll give you one example. I launched this research franchise called the Enterprise AI Maturity Index, which is designed to track how organizations around the world in all industries are using AI, how it's changing the way work gets done, how it's either breaking down or not breaking down silos in the enterprise, what that translates into in terms of ROI, et cetera. So we surveyed 4,500 big organizations in 15 different countries every year, take the results, boil them down into an enterprise AI maturity score out of 100, and then use that to track how AI is changing the global enterprise, which sounds cool but academic. The way it got used in ServiceNow, and this was just in the past couple of years, was a new CMO came in, a guy named Colin Fleming, who saw the value of that research, and he started building, big marketing programs around it. For example, ServiceNow, like most big tech companies, does an annual user conference. Ours is called Knowledge, and it's in Las Vegas every year, and tens of thousands of people show up. So the findings of the maturity index weren't just published on our website. They were all over the signage on the show floor. Our CEO and other executives were quoting stats from the study in the main stage. It was coming up in panel discussions. It spread everywhere. And that the findings from that one particular study, I think it became obvious to the whole marketing organization that this research was doing a lot of good work for the brand and for the broader go-to-market motion. So that's the thing more than anything that really showed me it was working.
So when you look back at your career at ServiceNow, what do you look at as your biggest successes? Things that you are taking forward with you to your new firm?
I was able to get the company to see the strategic value of thought leadership, as we just talked about, as being a tool in the toolbox that can elevate the whole go-to-market. It's not just a nice to have brand gilder. It's actually a brand builder. So that was thing one. Practically, in terms of the work itself, because that's the work itself is how you get to that impact. I'm very proud of having launched Workflow by ServiceNow, which was this editorial publication that I came up with the idea in late 2017. We launched it in 2018, and I think it's won more industry awards than any other enterprise tech publication, reached a big audience in the millions, and served as a platform from which we could project the expertise of our executives, also showcase our own research, our own reporting. My background coming into this, Bob, is I was a social scientist and a business journalist. And I used to edit business magazines. My first answer to any thought leadership challenge is, let's start a magazine. That's not always the right answer, but it's where my head goes. At both at HPE and at ServiceNow, starting a branded publishing platform and scaling that, building an audience against the content, having the content be editorially, journalistically really sound. We always made sure that we were advancing whatever the story was with real reporting, real research, et cetera. Seeing the uptake of Workflow and seeing the content travel, get used by our salespeople, get recognized by industry peers. I'm very proud of all that work. Second, I'm really proud of having established a proprietary research motion. And we talked about the Enterprise AI Maturity Index, but there were lots of other research franchises that my team launched. The work of the ServiceNow Workforce Skills Forecast, for example, partnership with Pearson, where we used AI to predict how AI is going to change the mix of skills that individuals and companies need to be successful in the AI era. A bit of a hall of mirrors there. Really useful research for our customers that, from a marketing point of view, supported ServiceNow's positioning as an employer of choice, as well as our whole training and certification programs, ServiceNow University. Every company in tech is in a bitter talent war right now, and everyone is vying to kind of train talented engineers and marketers and everyone else on their own platform so that they'll work in the ServiceNow ecosystem or the Alphabet ecosystem.
And that training platform at ServiceNow, is that both for ServiceNow employees as well as customers?
I'm very much the latter.
Yeah.
ServiceNow, it's a big company now. It grew from 5,500 people when I joined 8 years ago to 29,000 today. That's just a tiny sliver of all the ServiceNow trained professionals that are working across our customer base around the world. But I forget the exact figures, but ServiceNow is looking to certify several million train ServiceNow professionals to go out and manage the ServiceNow platform at every single company that we serve, every single big consulting organization, the Accentures and the Deloittes, who are resellers of the ServiceNow platform, they all need to be trained as well. So if you want to build a global platform ecosystem, which ServiceNow and others are in the business of doing, same is true for Google and Salesforce and Microsoft and lots of other companies. You need the talent, and the thought leadership research helped establish ServiceNow as a great destination for talent. I won't go into all the other research franchises, but there were a lot of them, and collectively they helped position ServiceNow not just as another software vendor, but as a true authority on the big business challenges that all organizations are dealing with right now. How do I retain talent in the AI era? How do I upskill my people? How do I evolve my organization to take advantage of AI? How do I measure the impact of AI? All these sort of big strategic questions. ServiceNow, in part, thanks to the work that my team did, has answers to and a perspective on.
And when you talk about thought leadership research inside of a tech firm, and I have a feeling the principles would apply outside of tech to management consulting or the architecture and engineering industry and others. But when you talk about thought leadership research in a tech company, did you ever run into anybody who said, well, we have a big R&D function. We have people who are in the product organization who are experimenting with new features and functions and work in the open source community. So what is this thought leadership? How does this thought leadership research at all fit with software product research? Did you ever run into that folks who are saying, I don't understand what you guys are doing in thought leadership research?
Yes and no. At ServiceNow, we built a robust thought leadership function within comms and marketing. Simultaneously, ServiceNow, like other big tech companies, has, to your point, a pretty robust product and product UX research team. So because ServiceNow is an AI company, they've hired a lot of PhD researchers who are in the business essentially of building new AI models, testing and presenting their work in peer-reviewed journals and conferences and stuff like that. It's really para-academic kind of function that the company invests in because they wanted to inform the products, but informing the products comes later. So there's a fair amount of pure research. Very honestly, I think we made some headway integrating thought leadership with that kind of deep tech research, in that we featured a lot of the researchers from our product research team on workflow. We interviewed them, we did bylines with them, we shot videos with them, etc. I think we could have done a lot more of that. A company I'll point to that does that kind of work really well, mentioned previously, is IBM. They have a long and honorable tradition of doing deep technology research in everything from AI to material science to advanced physics, quantum computing, all that stuff. They're quite good at taking that research and turning it into content that is of interest to business leaders, not just other scientists. We did some of that at ServiceNow, but I personally think we just scratched the surface.
So let's talk about artificial intelligence, including LLMs, generative AI, but other AI, and how you see those technologies changing the field of thought leadership for the better and possibly the worse.
Yeah, it's a mixed picture for sure. Let's start with the bad news to give people something to look forward to. Look, the bad news is there has always been a slop problem in corporate communications and marketing, where kind of everybody's just regurgitating conventional wisdom.
You're saying that predates generative AI?
Oh, absolutely. I would call it the original sin of marketing, especially in technology. Everybody just historically has often sounded the same, looked the same, come across the same. And I think And then here I'll reveal my bias as a journalist, but I think marketers in general are trained to come up with great creative solutions to strategies that are business strategies that are given to them. They're not trained to have the kind of bird dog curiosity you need to sniff out a fresh story and advance it and figure out how it's different from everybody else's story. That's really something journalists have to do to be successful. What that yields in enterprise tech, which is the field I know best, is a lot of pretty generic messaging where everybody sounds like everybody else. Enter AI, which makes that much, much worse, because suddenly any marketer can just fire up ChatGPT or Claude or whatever and come up with a superficially intelligent and plausible blog post that doesn't really advance the story, because all ChatGPT and Claude are doing is scouring the whole internet and re-swizzling in response to what they think you want to hear.
Right. So in other words, it's well written or well edited thoughts, but they're not original.
It's slop. Yeah, this is this is the slop problem. It's always been there. It's way worse with AI. The answer to that challenge has always been, you come up with an original perspective by having original data, first party research, executives, and technologists who come up with brilliant products that are different from everyone else's. That's your raw material for coming up with differentiated product marketing and differentiated thought leadership. I sum that up as a business journalist with, you always have to advance the story with fresh data that nobody else has, reporting, whatever it might be. If you have that fresh data, then AI becomes your best friend, because it greatly accelerates the process of going from the reporting and the research and the product roadmap and the state of the industry debate. All that AI can process really quickly and get you along the road from having an idea to building a messaging architecture to coming up with story ideas and research franchises to activate and publish those insights, so that ultimately, as I put it in my new business, are able to claim the frame, get the market to adopt your perspective on whatever the business challenge is. AI is super helpful for all of that, as long as, crucial caveat, you start with original insights based on proprietary research and data.
Right. So it can scale those proprietary insights. AI can be used to scale that, obviously far faster than human journalists and other writers can write from scratch and edit things written by humans.
Precisely. Yeah. And so there's the use of AI in two buckets. One is content creation. You can, if you have your data and you've done interviews and you have raw material that is unique to you, then AI can help you create the blog post or the white paper or the research product a lot faster. AI, increasingly also can do work on its own. Term of art for that is agentic AI. Increasingly, that's where the field is going. And where I see thought leadership, insight creation, and publishing going is increasingly a lot of what human researchers and editors and journalists have done in the past can be automated. You can turn an AI agent loose on your company's corpus of product documentation, for example. Everything your executives have ever said or thought in their lives can be very quickly scanned and synthesized and brought back to you with recommendations for how you turn it into content. And then the back-end publishing can also be automated. So that's, very few people are doing that successfully at scale right now, but that's definitely the future.
What's your view on the way AI is or could be used, if it's not being used today, to change the way companies do thought leadership research?
I'll give you a couple of examples. One we talked about, you can use AI to go out and crawl both internal and external data sets at global scale and enormous speed. Like that workforce skills forecast I mentioned was based on AI algorithms that our research partner Pearson built that went out and crawled Bureau of Labor Statistics data, US Census data, similar kind of labor market data in a bunch of different countries. And based on all that, huge volumes of raw public economic data, the AI kind of synthesized, okay, for these 5,000 different job roles, here are the 20 skills you need to do each of these jobs. And 5 years from now, we predict that AI will have taken over however many, 5 of them for a given role. And whereas the balance are going to stay with humans, but be augmented by AI. So that kind of work, that kind of research, AI can be super helpful. I'll give another example. Research project I did last year before I left ServiceNow, looking at Gen Z attitudes towards AI. We convened a bunch of Gen Zs working in corporate jobs as well as non-corporate young people across the global South. And we brought them together in conversation on a platform. And then we asked them a series of open-ended questions. How do you feel about AI? What excites you? What concerns you? What opportunities do you see? And then other than that, no moderation. We just let them talk to each other. Then we used AI to mine all the transcripts and come to a conclusion about them, like how does global Gen Z feel about AI? So here's what we learned. Gen Z consistently across all of these conversations, as well as a survey we did, were less, not unconcerned, but less concerned about AI taking their jobs, much more concerned about AI eating their brains. They were really just like fundamentally, existentially concerned about outsourcing their creativity and their cognitive abilities to large language models, which I think is something we're all concerned about. But knowing that, once again, I think really helped position ServiceNow as a company that was tuned into the broader impact of the technologies that they were selling. So that's using AI to do research.
So if you remember, how many Gen Z people were surveyed?
The survey was somewhere around 1,000, and the conversations was not a huge number. It was maybe like 100 or so.
Yeah.
But it could easily have been in the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
It's work that scales very easily.
So what I'm hearing there is one of the things that generative AI did, which would have taken a lot longer for humans to go through those transcripts and pick out, well, here's the biggest theme. It's that something about Gen Z fearing that, as you said, AI is going to eat their brains, eat their, do their thinking for them, and et cetera. Of course, so AI is doing something that would have been very difficult and take a lot of time to do manually, and pouring through all these transcripts and figuring out what are the threads that are running through them.
Yeah. So back in the day, marketers used to convene focus groups to do that kind of thing. And it was pretty expensive and laborious and manual. In my case, I'll just mention another kind of aspect of my background. Before I got into tech, I was trained as a social anthropologist. I was an ethnographer, and to get my PhD in anthropology, I spent 2 solid years living in Lahore, Pakistan, in order to understand how the local class system worked. And I just sat with hundreds of people and interviewed them, and then wrote notes and recordings, and then I had to manually transcribe all the recordings. It took a long time to get a dissertation. AI can do that work a lot faster and at global scale.
Yeah. Any other ways you think AI will change thought leadership research that you can see right now, knowing seems to me we're still in the early innings with generative AI?
Yeah. What we've talked about so far is AI-powered research methodologies, using AI to collect data in new ways. Even before you get out into the field gathering your data, you have to have an idea. You have to come up with a hypothesis to test. I have found that AI is an increasingly valuable thought partner at that early ideation level. Certainly, that was true when I was framing up research ideas at ServiceNow. Is very true now with my new consulting business, Walled City. I use AI all the time to just pressure test ideas that I have and that I'm pitching to clients or that I'm using to frame up my value proposition as a business. So all of that I would bucket under AI for ideation, and it's definitely helped me move a lot faster as a startup entrepreneur.
Yeah, to me, that's a real big value when you're an independent, you're a solo, or you have a small firm, and your colleagues, your partners are busy, and you just don't have a thought partner every moment that you need one to kind of check reality. So let's talk about your new venture, Walled City. And the way you describe your firm's focus suggests to me you see a bigger role for thought leadership than just for creating content and then, of course, marketing that content. Talked about market definition and strategy, executive narrative and positioning, which I love. Tell me about that larger positioning here.
Yeah. So Walled City is in the business of helping growth companies define and crucially claim and own their category. When I say growth company, typically technology companies, that's where the growth is, tech, biotech, software, hardware. It ranges from founder-led startups, very early stage companies, all the way up to established, typically mid-sized tech companies. That's where I've seen the early traction in my business. And what I found, Bob, is generally all companies need or have a burning interest in getting the market to adopt their view of the business challenge that they're solving. That's always been true in business. It's especially true nowadays under the influence of AI, where AI can make, thanks to AI, everyone sounds superficially intelligent, but everyone sounds the same. And it's very hard to win trust and credibility and authority because everybody sounds authoritative. Talk isn't just cheap. Intelligence isn't just cheap. It's basically free at this point. So how do you, as a tech company growing fast, either at the startup stage or later stage, that's trying to raise capital, or you're coming out with a new product, or you're pivoting because your initial business model didn't quite work out, or you're being acquired, all these kind of pivot points that every company goes through as it grows. Those are the points where category definition, fueled by thought leadership, can really help change how the market thinks about you. I'm going to give you just a couple of practical examples from the companies where I worked, which is how I got this thinking. ServiceNow, we talked about this earlier, when it started out, was viewed by the market as an IT ticketing system. 20 years later, it's an AI platform for global business, and its TAM has grown from 25 million at inception to the hundreds of billions today. HPE, when we spun it out from HP, was known as a data center hardware and software business, mostly a server vendor, and we reframed it as a hybrid cloud and advanced computing platform company, which again expanded the frame, made the market view it in a different way, which increased its value. Earlier example, the last time I was off on my own, before I joined HB, I did a lot of work with McKinsey's social sector practice. I helped them launch a magazine called Voices on Society that aggregated the expertise of McKinsey consultants and kind of outside authorities like Tony Blair and the head of the World Bank and all these people on big questions in international development. So McKinsey at that time wasn't especially well known for its work in the social sector. So reframing what that practice did as not just selling management consulting services, but convening a global conversation about the future of development really changed the way the market looked at them, and I think helped their business. So all of those experiences that informed what I'm doing with Walled City, it's not just coming up with a new label for your category. Often, startups especially often think that when they label the category, the job is done and they just have to sell their products. Category framing really means competing successfully in a marketplace of ideas, getting analysts and journalists and your competitors and your customers to start using your framework, your concepts, your language. Honestly, Bob, if there's one insight that inspired all this, it's from just my whole career in corporate America, where I learned over time, you can tell when you've won the meeting when the people around the table start using your language. It's the same with category definition for growth companies.
That's what we found more than 35 years ago with the whole business reengineering concept and movement is we defined the terms and the marketplace adopted the terms and practices. So what are your growth objectives for Walled City? To keep it small? You and contractors possibly, or make it big? You and a bunch of partners or lots of employees or something in between? And then why?
I want to scale. Right now, it's me and contractors and AI all coming together to provide solutions for clients. I think that model can scale significantly, but that scale within essentially an agency framework where you're basically selling services. I think what Walled City does has the potential to create its own tech category. I have a label. I've just said that the label is just the beginning, so don't invest too much in the label. But that label is authority infrastructure. I think that AI can take over a lot of what I do manually in terms of mining a company's internal corpus of documents, figuring out the messaging architecture, building content on top of that, distributing the content, measuring the extent to which the market is adopting your frame. A lot of that can be automated and turned into tech and sold via subscription, which is a very different and more scalable model than selling services the way I do now. That's broadly how I think about the growth trajectory.
And what kind of companies would you like to serve? The generative AI companies, the LLMs, or other categories?
Yeah, so far it's been everything from founder-led startups to established mid-sized tech companies, typically AI companies that want to play bigger. That's where I've seen the early traction. And look, it is early days. This business has been around for a quarter, and proud to say I've signed up a handful of clients. I'm excited about helping them.
Wonderful.
They're a mix of founders and mid-sized tech companies.
Yeah, that's terrific. Congratulations. So you want to grow it, and when will you know where you say, well, no, we want to stop growing? When will you know it's big enough?
I have no idea, Bob.
Or is that not even a question, I guess?
Yeah. All I know is that I love this work and I want to keep doing it as long as I can. For me, scaling means taking the Walled City approach and applying it to lots of different business challenges of lots of different companies. And that's the challenge that excites me right now, in contrast to what I've been doing for the past 10, 11 years, which was helping one company at a time. I love my work at ServiceNow and HPE, and I'm proud of everything I did there. And there is something special about being on the inside of a company and helping them grow. But now I'm doing that for myself with my own company, and I'm taking all the thinking and the approaches that I developed with everywhere that I've worked in my career, and I'm building a business model where I can apply that thinking and help lots of different companies. That's what's exciting to me. So the more I scale, the more companies I can serve, and that's where I see the broader impact happening.
Very exciting, Richard. Thanks for giving us a peek into your new venture, and I wish you the greatest success.
If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you left a like and if you shared the episode with your colleagues. Everything Thought Leadership is a video and podcast series from Boudet TLP. It's for thought leaders and thought leadership professionals, the people who help experts get recognized as thought leaders. You can find out more about Boudet Thought Leadership Partners at boudettlp.com.